Welcome back. All right, I want to say right at the start, I am wearing my Ryan Miller Ducks jersey. I wanted to wear it for the review, but I thought, nah, I wore Ducks for a review too the other day, and so I wanted to wear my Miller. And I thought, well, it's a good time now to wear it because it's power rankings time. Now, obviously, the Ducks aren't number one, but they had an okay week, and with the weakness of the bottom of the board, why to see them move up? So this week there's more movement than last week. There's only 5 teams that stay in the same spot, comparatively speaking, with last week where 8 stayed in the same spot. And number 31, I kind of had to really be honest about it. Number 31, putting the Vancouver Canucks, and I'm using this as a decal I got from their store, which, yeah, Vancouver goes 0-4 this week, and it's not just that they go 0-4. They're not the only team that went 0-4 this week. It's how. It's the fact that they're not in these games. It's not close. They're not getting enough shots and opportunities. They're just they look spent, and I feel bad for them because they've still got 11 games left. Yeah, they got 11 games left to play, and they're done. So I would imagine I'll be doing a lot of reviews for Canuck games over the next couple of weeks. There's going to be days where it's just the Canucks and the Flames. There won't be anything else to. It's going to be the weirdest end to a season I've ever gone through, and I think anybody's ever gone through. But it's where we're at, and the Canucks 31st, and again they drop 8 spots from last week because I couldn't in good faith put them ahead of anybody else on the board right now, not based on what I've seen in the last 4 games. So number 30, moving up 1 spot from last week. They're now 16, 25, and 11. They went 1-1-2 this week, and that's Columbus. Now, we know Columbus struggles with scoring. Their goaltending's been pretty good. Scoring's an issue. Winning's an issue. They only won 1 out of 4, but they only lost 1 in regulation out of 4. So I don't have a problem with putting them ahead of Vancouver because the effort's there. They took Carolina to overtime. They did have the 1-0 shootout loss against Detroit. So, I mean, the effort level is there, and Grace was absolutely fantastic for Detroit that night, so which is not news anymore. So, yeah, I have Columbus at number 30. Number 29, dropping 1 spot from last week. They actually went 2-2 this week, but it's how they finished the week. It's the way they wiped out at the end of the week. So they're 19, 24, and 6 altogether, and that's the Kings. The back-to-back losses against Anaheim, troubling. And tonight's loss, 6-1, I looked at that result and I said, well, I can't have them ahead of Anaheim, who they were 1 spot ahead of coming into today, when they lose 6-2 against them. So, yeah, it was 6-2 was the final. Kept thinking 6-1, but 6-2 is the final. And so, yeah, the Kings dropped down to 29th, and a 500 week isn't going to move them up because they're not really in this. I don't know what to make of the Kings going into next season. I know Byfield looks like he's going to be a keeper, and there's a lot of good young players there. It'll be interesting to see what they do this summer. So that wraps up the bottom 3. You'll notice Seattle's on the board. I'm not going to start ranking Seattle officially until the expansion draft. We've joked around during Buffalo's losing streak and all that, but I'm not doing that now. But I want Seattle to be on the board because we're going to have 32 starting next year. And I also want to throw in, for people who are watching and don't just skip to the end, the board I talked about having the puck board. I've been in contact with somebody and emailed back and forth somebody who's going to try to come up with a board that's going to do exactly that, where I'm going to have this basically wooden board that I'll have all the pucks on to rank all 32 teams next year, and I'll be able to utilize the puck sets that I have and I've had in my possession for the last couple of years. I've been adding to them as well, and I think it's going to be fantastic. Next year's power rankings should look really unique. So yeah, just throwing that in now, just for people who don't skip to the end. Number 28, but for people who do skip to the end, just say, I'm really surprised that you're going to set fire to all of your boards when the season's over. I can't wait for the bonfire. Just put that in the comments. And then people are like, what are you talking about? And you'll say, oh man, you must have skipped to the end. It's great. So, all right, number 28. I'm not going to mess around with magnets at the end, but I have no problem with saying things that aren't true. Number 28, Anaheim. So Anaheim, they move up 1 spot. Anaheim's record this week was 2-2 as well, But again, so both teams go 2-2, but Anaheim did beat LA twice head to head, so I have to move them ahead of LA. So yeah, they're right up next to one another, and that shouldn't really be a surprise either. So they move up just the one spot. Again, the teams at the bottom, it's pretty predictable who's going to be down towards the bottom. Number 27. They went 0-4 this week, so the same record as Vancouver. They're 13-32-7. They dropped 2 spots from last week, and that's Buffalo. So again, if not for the crash from Vancouver, Buffalo would have dropped 3 spots. They're back to last place in the East on the board. It's a rough go. Again, they kind of got better for a bit there, and now they've kind of started looking like they did during the losing streak. But again, there's some good things going on here. Luukkonen, who got hurt today, he's looked pretty good. Reinhart seems to be really excelling right now, and Dahlin has bounced back from the rough start to the season that he had. So there are positives for Buffalo right now, and we'll see how they add to that during the offseason. Number 26. These guys went 2-2 this week as well. They're 20-26-5 altogether. They move up 1 spot from last week, and that's San Jose. California has had a rough year. And so we've got 3 California teams on the board, even though only 6 teams in total are on the board. 7 if you include Seattle. So San Jose in the final column again. They do move up the 1 spot. They gave Colorado a bit of a run tonight, but in the end, Colorado does win the game. And so for San Jose, they're into that bad luck next year territory, and as are the other California teams right now. I don't really have anything to add to that. Number 25. These guys went 1-3 this week. They're 22-22-7, and they dropped 4 spots. And I've been accused of being too hard on this team, but I don't see how I can be too hard on them when they lost the way they did this week, and that's Philly. This was a really bad week for Philadelphia, and I've been hard on them because they've kind of crashed out. They were number 2 in the division. So I still have the board, right, from the start of the season, the big 4 foot by 2 foot board that I abandoned for this one, for Power Ranking, because I didn't need that one. But I had, of course, the playoff matchups on there. Philadelphia was 2nd. And of the 16 teams that were in playoff matchups, the only 2 that have dropped out are Dallas and Philly. The other 14 teams are still playoff teams. So it shows getting off to a fast start. Sometimes that's all you need in order to make the playoffs. And Philadelphia had a fast start, and they've had a really, really rough time of it lately. So, yeah, they're 25th. Number 24. These guys went 3-0-1 this week. They may have victimized Philly, and that's New Jersey. So New Jersey with a 3-0-1 week, they move up to 6th in the division, which I don't think that's the best they've been all year necessarily, but it might be. So they move up 6 spots. Kudos to New Jersey, who are the biggest movers up the board this week. And part of this comes down to the fact that these are the easier teams to pass, right? So for New Jersey, who are eliminated from the playoffs, they also eliminated Philly. And much like LA and Anaheim, I could not have Philly ahead of New Jersey on the board. Not with what we just witnessed this week. And what started out as New Jersey might have fluked that, turned into New Jersey just looks like the better team between they and Philadelphia. And there you are. They're number 24. Number 23. Moving up 3 spots from last week. They went 2-0-1 this week, and they've looked pretty good as well. So they didn't lose in regulation, and that's Ottawa. So Ottawa, I don't know that that's the highest they've been all year. I will say next week is the last power rankings of the regular season. So when I finish next week's power rankings, we're going to take a look through and see who peaked at where and who finished where and all this. It's going to be fun. But Ottawa, yeah, they look pretty legit. They've moved up. They are now legitimately ahead of Vancouver, both in standings and on the board here. And next season's going to be fascinating because there's going to be expectations. One thing this team is not dealing with right now is an expectation of anything. They can just go out there and have fun because they're already eliminated. They knew they weren't going to make it. When the expectation is there, it can change things. So we'll see how things go for Ottawa next season. Number 22. These guys went 1-2-1 this week. They stay in the same spot as last week, and that's Arizona. Arizona just winning the 1 out of 4. they're not going to make it. That one win was over Vegas, right? And they did come back tonight and tie Vegas, and then of course they lose in overtime. But yeah, Arizona's basically done for the season. So yeah, Arizona stays in the same spot, 22nd, which means 21st. I'm sure there's fans saying, "Wait, where are we?" So at number 21, moving up 3 spots from last week. They went 1-1-1 this week, but you know what? If I could put Thomas Greiss on this board at 21, I would. Greiss drags him here. So they're number 7 overall in the Central, and for Detroit, they've won more games right now than they won all last season. It's been a good run so far, and the future is going to keep looking up. The rookies come over next year. You're going to have guys like Raymond, Berggren may very well end up in there, Seider, and others. And Veleno's looked pretty good in his early games with Detroit. Future's very, very bright for the Wings. And yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what they do next year. I've actually found myself rooting for the Wings at points this year, which has never happened. I have not rooted for the Detroit Red Wings since, I want to say it was 88, the conference final against the Edmonton Oilers. I think that was the last time, might have been 86. But it's been a while, is what I'm saying. Last time I remember really rooting for them in the playoffs, really wanting to do well. And yeah, this has just been an interesting run for them. Number 20. Staying in the Central, this team went 0-2-1 this week. They dropped 1 spot from last week by going 0-2-1, and that's Chicago. The Hawks, I mean, they came back and they made it close against Florida, right? Florida couldn't pull away from them, and here we are. The Chicago Blackhawks are going to be an interesting team to watch next year as well, and how they navigate the summer, and do you just leave the kids in there? Do you try to augment it with some more veterans? Does Jonathan Toews come back? Do we know for sure whether or not Jonathan Toews comes back before free agency? How does all of this affect what Stan Bowman does in the offseason? It'll be very interesting for Chicago. So they're not going to make the playoffs this year, clearly, but again, they ended up being a little bit closer for a little bit longer than we might have expected. And then, of course, they struggle against Carolina, Florida, and Tampa. And that's what they have to watch next year, is being able to get up for those games against the big teams, which are going to be Colorado, likely St. Louis, and in Minnesota may very well be one they have to worry about next year as well. Winnipeg, we'll see. Winnipeg, it's been kind of a different week for them. You're going to see them a little bit sooner on the board than we've seen them all year. So yeah, Chicago number 20. Number 19. These guys move up 1 spot from last week. They went 1-2, and they're competitive, but in the end, for Calgary, they're missing the playoffs as well. So for the Flames, you will notice too, I brought back the numbers on the board. So instead of the handwritten ones. So just transitioning back to the big board next week is the plan. Until I get the replacement board, I'm going to transition back to the big board next week, and then rearrange all the tape and rearrange the divisions, because we're going back to the normal division next season. So yeah, minus Arizona going over to the Central and Seattle joining the Pacific. But yeah, for Calgary, it's been one of those years. Both the Canucks and the Flames kind of have to look at this year and say, all right, so what next? I think for the Flames, I think there's more questions than there are for Vancouver right now, just because for Vancouver, a lot of these players are a lot younger than necessarily are those in Calgary. And we'll see how they handle the expectation in the offseason, and do things change. It really feels like things need to change in Calgary in terms of their forward group. I think Markstrom's a pretty good fit. He's been better over the last couple of weeks, and he'll figure it out. But I do wonder about that forward group in Calgary. So we'll see. Number 18. These guys went 1-2-1 this week. Is another rough week for them. They're not going to make the playoffs in all likelihood either. They're at the same spot they were last week, and that's Dallas. They needed a win tonight. They needed a win in regulation. They didn't get it. So they're now, 3 points back in Nashville. They've got 1 game in hand. They are no longer in control of their destiny, and they have 2 more games left against Tampa. So yeah, their season looks like it's likely gonna fall apart on them here. And that's okay. Like, it's not something that I'm overly upset with necessarily. I know that going into the playoffs, and I've talked about this in videos, going into the playoffs, if teams I cheer for don't make the playoffs, kind of makes the playoffs easier for me to watch. I'm not as emotionally invested in it. I can do reviews for you guys without, needing maybe a few minutes before I start that review, and Yeah, I mean, it ends up being pretty fun. And then when I'm doing videos too, there won't be as many people saying, oh, well, clearly there's a bias in favor of or against. It still happens where people will say it, but it's less likely when you don't have Dallas or Vancouver in the playoffs. So for Dallas, a lot of injuries. We'll see how they are when they're healthy next year and how that works out for them. Number 17. 0-3 this week. And they've lost 6 in a row, all in regulation. They dropped 5 spots from last week, and that's Winnipeg. So the Jets, 17th on the board, and I have them 4th right now in the North. They are only a couple of points ahead of Montreal. This could potentially get worse. Although, is that worse or is that better? Like, if the Jets play Edmonton in the first round, is that really better than playing Toronto when you consider the records against those teams? They may prefer Toronto to Edmonton. So do you just intentionally lose that doesn't seem like something hockey players would do, but maybe you're better off say, hey, Montreal, you guys take on Edmonton, we'll take on Toronto, and there you go. But either way, Toronto is playing better than Winnipeg right now, so even if that was your matchup, Winnipeg just, it's not there. And I'm not sure what's happened. I think the big difference, Hellebuck's gone from being a world beater to being a pretty good goaltender. They need him to be a world beater. All year, the advanced stats people will tell you that Winnipeg's been kind of buoyed by their goaltending. And right now, people who are into the advanced stats are telling you this is what we warned you was coming. So we'll see whether or not Winnipeg can pull themselves out of this dive they've been in. Number 16. Speaking of a bit of a dive, they take a dive at the end of the week. They were actually moving their way up at the start of the week. But they end up dropping 2 spots. Overall, they go 2-2 on the week, and that's the Rangers. So the Rangers are 16th on the board, not making the playoffs. They needed to win those games against the Islanders, preferably in regulation. They needed to get a goal against the Islanders, and they didn't. So for the Rangers, it is a drop of a couple of spots. The Islanders just had their number, and they had their number for a lot of games this season. It's remarkable how many times they shut out the Rangers this year. So the Rangers will be glad not to see the Islanders nearly as much next year as they saw them this year, even though they'll still be in the same division. They'll only see each other a maximum of 4 times. So they'll only see them half the amount of times they saw them this year, which may very well be for the best for the New York Rangers. Future's still bright. The important thing is not to get too discouraged and not to overcorrect. But yeah, the Rangers, outside the playoff picture right now, I still have them ahead of Winnipeg only because Winnipeg 0-6 in their last 6, and the Rangers did win 2 out of 4 this week. So yeah, that's where we're at. Number 15. You know, it's interesting. So these guys went 3-1 this week. They move up 2 spots, and they solidified their spot in the playoffs, and that's Montreal. So there's been points on the power rankings that it's been said I'm too nice to Montreal, and there's been points where I'm too harsh. I think with how they played this week, I think it shows I've had them in basically the right spot, where right around the middle of the pack is where they belong. I will be interested to see how it works out in the playoffs. I'll be interested to see how Suzuki, Caulfield, and others work out in the playoffs. It's going to be a very interesting playoffs indeed. Yeah, we'll see how things go. Montreal, though, I have them ahead of Winnipeg because right now they're playing better than Winnipeg. Like I said, Winnipeg 0-3, Montreal 3-1 this week, and so Montreal jumps past them. Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. A couple weeks' time, playoffs get started. Who ends up third? All of a sudden, Montreal has a realistic shot at third place. They need some help from other teams against Winnipeg, sure, but they have a realistic shot. Number 14. Moving up 1 spot from last week. They went 2-1 this week. Huge win tonight in overtime, and that's Nashville. So Nashville, again, still, very subtle move up the board. I still have them 4th in the Central. I will be very interested to see with them. Are they capable of going on a 2017-like run? I've said this in recent weeks as well. Nashville, I think, is a better team when they play as an underdog than when they play as a favorite. Some teams are like that, and I think in Nashville's case, when people don't believe in them and there's no pressure, I think that's when they go out there and they try to prove people wrong. We'll see what Nashville does, but they've solidified that win over Dallas tonight. That should basically do it. And Saros looks like he's going to be pretty reliable for them. So Nashville, any question marks that we had early in the season. They've all cleared up. And boy, was it ever a good thing that David Poile didn't sell everybody when that was the rumor and that was all the rage. Because, yeah, they were never that far out. Number 13. They go 2-1 this week. They are staying in the same spot they were last week. Like I said, 2-1 this week, and that's the Islanders. Very, very impressive wins over the Rangers. Absolutely, yes. Really, with the Rangers, it's a matter of teams didn't drop down to them yet. For the Islanders, teams didn't drop down to them yet. But if they have another week like this week, I can see that they'll probably end up. Again, the teams at this level from 13 up, it's a pretty good list. It really is. And because of the fact that you only play teams in your division, it is really difficult to move up and move down on this list, at least with the way that I do this, the way that I figure all this out, because we don't have that playing in between the divisions. So, yeah, the Islanders, 13th, I have them, 4th in their division, but again, best of 7 series, if they can play like they did against the Rangers, against one of the other teams in that division, it could be tough. Number 12. These guys move up 4 spots. They went 3-0-1 this week, and they showed they want it. They showed they want that last spot, and that's St. Louis. Very impressive week. That's the kind of week I've been waiting for from St. Louis, and we finally got it. So St. Louis moving back up on this board, and the way they're playing right now, I know they lost that one in overtime tonight against Minnesota. I know they lost the lead. So it's not perfect, but they seem to be having fun. They're loose out there. Binnington's starting to round into form. I don't know. They may very well be capable of an upset too. I think the most interesting thing this year is going to be when those upsets take place, how many people say, see, I knew going to the playoffs they were going to be good. So when we get into the playoff previews, I'll be doing, as I always do on the channel, the predictions. See, if who the channel predicts is going to win each round. And there will be those who take the underdogs. And it'll be interesting to see if St. Louis is a popular underdog to take this year. Because much like Nashville, I think St. Louis excels when they're an underdog in the playoffs as opposed to when they're a favorite. Part of what I think helped them in 2019, not just that they were really hot going into the playoffs, but there wasn't that pressure on them that other teams had. Number 11. Staying in the same spot as last week. They went 3-1. They had a very good week. They're 30-17-2. And Edmonton is legit the second best team in the North. And I don't see any scenario where they lose that spot. Because I really don't think it's possible. They're going to clinch themselves a playoff spot probably on Monday. And from there they can just relax a bit. I don't know how much they're going to relax. They seem like they're on a team on a mission, or more importantly, McDavid's on a mission. McDavid right now is absolutely on a mission. He gets 3 points tonight after being shut out by Calgary in the last game. And he'll probably get 100 points. He's likely going to get 100 points. That's where we're at right now. It's remarkable, but they have games left against Vancouver, who are down here. And Vancouver has not had a good time when it comes to keeping the puck out of their net. So that's a matchup that definitely is going to favor Edmonton. I'd be very surprised if McDavid doesn't rack up a bunch of points there. Number 10. These guys will 1-1-1 this week. So 1 win, 1 loss, 1 overtime loss. They dropped 2 spots from last week, and that's Minnesota. I like the comebacks. I don't like the fact they need to make comebacks. So that's the thing with Minnesota. Love the comebacks. Don't like the fact that they have to make comebacks to, in one case, lose in overtime, and in the next one, they win in overtime. So, impressive that they bounce back tonight. They come back from behind, and they win that. But, again, for me with Minnesota, what's interesting, too, is their next 2 games are against Vegas. They have a very good record against Vegas this year. Vegas is one of the hottest teams in the league right now. And so we'll see whether or not Minnesota can cool them off. I know Arizona shut them out once this week, but that means that Vegas has won 11 out of 12. So it's Colorado all over again. You don't want to overcorrect for one game when it's one game. And with Colorado, I didn't, and I'm not going to with Vegas either. Number 9. This team goes 3-0-1 this week. So they're 34-14-3. They're in the running for first place in their division, and that's Tampa. So Tampa, Minnesota drops below them. So they've passed Minnesota. I have them third in the Central. That division's so bunched up, it's ridiculous. But again, they're not in the top column because a team passed them to move into the top column, and so Tampa's in the running for winning the division. Again, see how things go for them this week. But yeah, I've been impressed with Tampa. This isn't a matter of me not being impressed with Tampa. It's just the teams in this first column playing really, really well for the most part. There's one team that may very well drop out of this column next week, and we'll get to them. Number 8, they're 3-1 this week. They move up 2 spots from last week. They're finally back in this first column, and that's Boston. So the Boston Bruins move up to number 8. That's the highest they've been on this board in a while. They're third in the division, and yeah, they've looked pretty darn solid in their last they've won 9 out of 11. It's a pretty good run they've been on. Yes, the wins over Buffalo are wins over Buffalo, but everything seems to be coming together, and that second line is giving them the depth scoring they've needed. Corrali gets a goal today. Their defense seems to be getting healthy. Fingers crossed that stays that way, of course, if you're a Bruins fan. But yeah, things are coming together pretty well for the Bruins. They jump back into the first column. They're up to number 8. They've been gradually moving their way up over the last, month? It's been about a month. Number 7. These guys dropped 2 spots. They went 3-1 this week, but they get passed. They had 2 teams that passed them, and so they dropped 2 spots, and that's Florida. So again, Florida had a decent week, but I felt that 2 teams passed them on the board overall. And yeah, we'll see how things go next week. Florida has all kinds of things going right for them right now. And to me, first and foremost, is the Sam Bennett trade just looks brilliant right now. He has fit in absolutely perfectly. He had another assist tonight. He's up to 12 points in 8 games or 13 points in 9 games. Something. He's up to a very good total overall. And it's been great. He's already scored more points as a Panther than he did as a Flame. It's been a perfect fit. And it's nice when that happens. It's something that I think all GMs look for. I will say that when Vancouver picked up Matthew Highmore, they were expecting more than what they got from that. And that's the thing. There's always some guesswork. There's always an amount of gambling when it comes to making a trade. And in Florida's case, that gamble worked out very well. So again, they dropped not because they had a bad week, but I felt there were a couple that had better weeks than they did. Number 6, these guys go 1-1-1. They dropped 2 spots. I wasn't too mean to Washington. Again, they only won 1 out of 3 this week. But, and here's the asterisk on Washington. If they have another week coming up like they just had, Washington will drop out of the top column as I'm, for getting ready for the playoffs. Teams that are struggling going into the playoffs very often will end up being teams that are out in the playoffs. And so, yeah, the Caps, they need to have a good bounce back week this week. We'll see how things go. Because I could totally see Florida, Boston, Tampa all ending up ahead of them. I could see potentially Minnesota with a really good week, especially if they beat Vegas a couple of times. I could see there being a situation where Washington, if it's combined with them having a poor week, ending up as low as 10 or 11 next week. So we'll see, right? I don't like to punish teams too much that one week. And yeah, we'll see how things go for Washington. Number 5, 3-1 week this week. Great week for them. They move up 2 spots. They're 34-15-3, and that's Pittsburgh. So Pittsburgh, number 5, and number 1 in the East. There you go. So there's been a lot of furrowed brows where I've had Pittsburgh, but Pittsburgh's been gradually working their way up the board. And with a good week, combined with the fact they beat Washington twice, and tonight they made it look like they're going to be able to beat them in a playoff series potentially. And I know Washington fans are going to say, hey, when we've got our team healthy, I know. But yeah, Pittsburgh looked pretty good. And they did it without needing any points from Crosby tonight too. And they did it with a shutout. So again, if Ovi's in the lineup, that's different, but potentially different anyways. But yeah, Pittsburgh's looked pretty good. This has been a good little run for Pittsburgh. And it just keeps building. So now that they've got a good record against, top teams in the division, they're number 1 in the division and number 5 on the overall board. Number 4, these guys went 3-0 this week, so they didn't lose. They move up 2 spots from last week, and that's Toronto. So their most recent losses were against Vancouver. Were those games that they should have lost? No. The first one they lost was because Holtby stole it. The second one was because Riddick was awful. He was fundamentally flawed throughout that game. Both of those games, I think it was the scoring chances were combined 52-17 in favor of Toronto in those 2 games. Toronto's been playing very, very well for a long while now. And so, well, yeah, they don't play teams in the South and all that. Well, these teams don't play other teams in the other divisions either. So there's the possibility that when we look back on this year, we'll say, well, the North was just as bad. When we saw in the semifinal Toronto against, it doesn't matter whether it's Pittsburgh or Colorado or whoever, they got swept and it looked ugly. Then we can have that discussion. But for right now, I can only go by what I see, which is Toronto taking care of business. Matthews with a bunch of goals. And both Campbell and Riddick had good games this week. Campbell is a pretty decent goaltender. And they should have Freddie back before the playoffs. Should. I mean, he's been working out with them, so he should be back before the playoffs, I would think. And then we'll see how things turn out for them. But for right now, yeah, I have number 1 in the North, and with 3 straight wins, they move up to 4th. All right, number 3. Number 3 on the board, they went 2-2 this week. So they lose the first 2 games this week, and then they get healthy, and they look a lot better. So in the end, Colorado drops 1 spot. Colorado could have dropped more, but to me it looks like Colorado is back. That Rantanen, Grubauer, and everybody being is there. Everybody is looking pretty good. Now, Girard's out, and it looks like it's going to be a couple of weeks, something along those lines. And so there's always going to be injury problems because Colorado. But getting Mikko Rantanen back seems to have really helped. Grubauer being back in the last game seems to have helped as well. And so I didn't bust Colorado down further than number 3. Because in the last couple of games, they've looked like they're back. And I know San Jose and all that, but they definitely look like they're back and they've got it together. Number 2, these guys went 3-0-1 this week. So they had a very good week. And that's Carolina. Carolina, I have them number 1 in the Central. I have them number 2 overall. So that's moving up 1 spot from last week. They're in the running for the overall, the President's Trophy. You don't want it. You don't want the President's Trophy. You just don't want the President's Trophy. I don't know how else to put this. It's not a trophy you necessarily want. But Carolina's played very well. They definitely seem to have. It's weird. They seem to have issues beating Columbus and Detroit and making it, wins that are of the really, how do I put this? They should win them easier than they do. They're not decisive victories. So there's that concern that if Carolina's against the lower ranked teams, the good news is in the playoffs you're not. So in the playoffs, Carolina should be up for every game. Teravainen being back's been great. So overall things are going pretty darn well for Carolina right now. And they're number 2 on the board. Which means number 1, second week in a row, they went 2-1 this week. And that's Vegas. Yes. Vegas gets shut out by the Arizona Coyotes. Vegas then had a 2-0 lead. I think they got kind of lazy with the 2-0 lead tonight. And Arizona realized how badly they needed the point to stay within shouting distance of, or howling distance of 4th place. And so, they win it in overtime. And Vegas has won 11 of their last 12 games. So with the way that the rankings work, if I'm going to say, all right, well, they lost that 1 game this week, so they can't be first. That just, no. So they're number 1. Colorado and Vegas are right there with one another. Vegas playing against Minnesota is going to be big because Minnesota's definitely given them headaches this year. And so we'll see if Minnesota's capable of doing that again. But there you go. Power rankings, the second to last power rankings of the year. Next week is week 16 of the power rankings, and that is the end of it for the season. So that'll be weird and strange and all that. Yeah, only 16 power rankings this year. I think normally it's like 22. So it shows how much this schedule is condensed. And hey, it's been a lot of fun. So let me know your thoughts in the comments section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.